Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
It's me, Egbert, once again. I'm the new owner of this station. I went out and hired the best talk radio consultant, Jeff Allen from News Talk STL, and told him to hire the worst talent he could find. Jeff did exactly as I told him. Ladies and gentlemen, here are Brad and John.
Well, John, modern technology sometimes faults on you. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes it just doesn't want to work. And that seemed to be the problem because I lost my internet here at the studio. So I don't think it wasn't on your end. It was my end. I'm pretty sure. Anyway.
I thought you were just so mildly annoyed at me as usual that you just said, "Hey, I'm done with this for today." You know what I mean?
No.
But in the meantime, I called Emmanuel Cleaver, and he expressed to me that broadband fiber is indeed racist, and he wants $11 billion to fix the problem.
John's making fun of the fact that Emmanuel Cleaver, essentially everything has become racist according to Emmanuel Cleaver, right? I mean,
I would consider him a freedom fighter, and it takes a lot of courage to point out that weather is racist. For years, Brad, we've just been letting weather have its way with us. You know what I'm saying? And people are like, "Oh, you can't do it." And Mark Twain has these witty quotes about the weather and all this other stuff. But Emmanuel Cleaver is really the first one to come out and say, "Listen, we're not going to let weather discriminate against us anymore." You know?
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
I kidded about this when I was on the old show with Shelley, that if you can be transsexual, why can't you be transracial? And you remember what happened? The classic example was a lady by the name of Rachel Dolezal, who, by the way, changed her name, who declared herself, well, she said she was a black lady. And I think at one point in time she was the president of the NAACP of Washington State, wasn't that?
Yeah, she was.
She was like a bigwig. And then some investigative journalist, when journalists actually investigated things instead of just essentially being activists for certain causes, they went and had an interview with her parents. And her parents said, "She's not black. Look at us. We're both white." And they confronted her, and she admitted, "Well, I'm not really black." Okay. So why is it that you can one morning wake up and be a man, and the next morning you can wake up and be a woman, and you can compete in women's sports? So I've always said we have a problem with transracialism because of the fact that if all of a sudden one morning I decided I was black, the black people would go, "You can't be black. You weren't born black." Okay. So my next thing is I'm going to be trans age. Okay. Actually,
yes.
my real age is 88, but you know what? Today, I'm going to declare myself 21. And you know what I'm going to do? Today's my birthday, by the way. I'm 21
You're going to
today.
go get some free shots down at the landing. You're going to go to Mississippi Nights down in the landing.
No, I'm going to Fast Eddie's to get that T-shirt. You know, I celebrated my 21st birthday.
What's funny, so later on tonight, I'm going to be in an undisclosed area. And instead of being in the outfield area on the grass,
right,
if a fly ball comes to the outfield, instead of coaching the outfielders, I'm going to just whip out my glove and make the catch. And they're like, "Sir, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "You expect a bunch of 7-year-olds to shag fly balls?"
Well, but
I'm 7.
See,
who's to say I wasn't born 7 years ago?
The interesting thing about that is, and I know people are going to go, "Oh, I can't believe he's talking about this. He's being terrible." Okay, let's say I was not the best basketball player, which I wasn't, but, I'm 6'2" right now, okay?
Yeah.
And I'm not the fastest guy around, but I bet if I took on a 6-year-old 1-to-1, I could beat the pants off of that 6-year-old, okay?
Beat the pants off of him.
Right.
Brad.
So I could say, well, I feel like I'm 6 years old. I identify as 6 years old.
You identify as a 6-year-old.
I identify as a 6-year-old. Why can't I do that? Okay. Changing subjects. Can I ask you a real honest-to-goodness opinion?
Yes, I'll give you honest-to-goodness answer.
Tell me your opinion of Pete Buttigieg.
I think he's just a very well-intentioned, effeminate liberal, and I think that he's, just a little bit of a He's a good example. If I think of a well-intentioned, soft bureaucrat, I think of Pete Buttigieg.
Okay, over the weekend, I can't remember if this was on the Sunday morning, one of the Sunday morning shows. He was on, is it Kristen Welker? Is she on NBC? I can't remember what show this is from.
I don't even know.
But he's being interviewed by this news person. Here, let me play this for you. I found this to be, shall we say, I'm thinking to myself, I can't believe this because of the fact we have a journalist who is pushing an issue and not taking no for an answer. Let me see if I can get this to play. Hold on a minute. I think this is the one. Yeah,
the Federal Highway Administration says only 7 or 8 charging stations have been produced with a $7.5 billion investment that taxpayers made back in 2021. Why isn't that happening more quickly?
So the president's goal is to have 500,000 chargers up by the end of this decade. Now, in order to do a charger, it's more than just plunking a small device into the ground. There's utility work, and this is also really a new category of federal investment. But we've been working with each of the 50 states. Every one of them is getting formula dollars to do this work, engaging them in the first handful. Again, by 2030, 500,000 chargers. And the very first handful of chargers are now already being physically built.
Okay,
the Federal Highway.
She even laughs. She says, and this is the story. Here, let me play the beginning one more time.
The administration says only 7 or 8 charging stations have been produced with a $7.5 billion investment that taxpayers made back in 2021.
Okay, this is 2024. Okay, we spent $7.5 billion of your and my taxpayer money, and 3 years later, we have 7 or 8 charging stations. Now, don't you find that to be very funny? I mean, it's funny, and it's funny in a sad way. It's like, oh my God, you know what I'm saying?
Brett, did you not hear Pete say? Did you not hear Mayor Pete say it takes utility work too, Brad? There's other stuff that has to go into this. You have to make sure that O'Fallon solar farm from Ameren can power that station.
Is he the perfect politician? Because he never answers her question. And what's interesting is, if you watch the video, you can't hear it that well. At one point, she's doing like the head move, like, okay, she's doing.
She laughs. I
know she laughs. She laughs
now,
because
she sounds mildly annoyed.
Well,
when he said, he repeats himself, and he's like, "Well, as I said, by 2030."
Right. What? I mean, once again, we spent $7.5 billion. Remember, and this is one of the original initiatives when Biden got into office. Man, we're going to spend this money. We're going to build charging stations.
That's right.
And 3 years later, we have 7 or 8. Now, you notice he never disputed that because this was an official government report that stated that we only had 7 or 8 of these charging stations done. Okay, now think about that for a minute. We're not talking 7 or 8 charging stations in O'Fallon, Missouri, or we're not talking about 7 or 8 charging stations in Chesterfield, Missouri, or Cahokia, Illinois. We're talking about 7 or 8 charging stations in the entire country.
It seems like the type thing where if you were a Rand Paul, you would go in and you would look at that budget and say, quite literally, Brad, where did the money go? Like, how are we here? What have we spent the money on, if not? And maybe there's a good answer here. Let me be naive and say maybe there's a good answer, and maybe building whatever the utility infrastructure takes time. I don't know, but at a certain point, it seems ridiculous.
Okay, now I'm going to make my argument to what you just said. Okay, not essentially maybe amplify on it. There's this guy by the name of Elon Musk. Okay, and he comes out with these electric cars, and he realizes that in order for his electric cars to be successful, there have to be places to charge them. So what does he do? He builds his own network of charging stations, which have become very successful. I know of several of them. There's one out in St. Charles right off of 94 or 70 in Zumble, right next to the Smash Burger right there in that Deerbergs Plaza. I mean, and they have gotten to the point where I have a couple friends of mine that have Tesla. They love the cars. Matter of fact, the original Teslas, I don't know if you know this or not, the original Teslas, when you bought them, you got lifetime charging for free. The idea being was he knew that if you're going to try to change the habits of the motoring public from an ICE engine, internal combustion engine, into an electric vehicle, you have to overcome the obstacles of charging the vehicle. So how in the world has Tesla been able to plant these charging stations all over the country, and after what'd she say, $7.5 or $8 billion, $7.5 billion, 3 years later, we have 7 or 8 charging stations. Don't you?
Well, but imagine the freedom, though, that Elon Musk has to go in and not care about regulations or only abide by the bare minimum of regulations. Imagine, Brad, if you were tasked with building one of these, and imagine just trying to, for the government, imagine trying to navigate your own internal bureaucracy of getting approval for every single step.
But John,
there's just no way you could get it done.
Well, no. Elon already did that. And what you said was, I mean, he didn't just go in and just plunk these things down. He had to go in and get permits. He had to go in and deal with Ameren, to wire them up. He had to have equipment vendors that supplied the chargers. He had to have the guys come and install them, and there's guys that maintain them. Once again, why didn't the federal government just go to Tesla and say, hey, Elon, you've done a nice job with this charger thing. You know what? We got $7.5 billion that's burning a hole in our pocket. If we gave you this $7.5 billion, how many charging stations do you think you could put up in 3 years? I don't think it would be 7 or 8. You know what I mean?
Well, he said he tried to get a meeting with Buttigieg, but Pete was on maternity leave, wasn't he?
Don't get me going, John. I mean,
Pete was out for 3 months on maternity leave. And then that was thankfully the same time that other guy was getting his prostate checked out, So that was they weren't concurrent there. So thankfully they staggered the appointments a little bit.
The crazy thing about this is every time I hear Pete Buttigieg talk, it's like he should teach a class in what would be the term, obfuscation? Would that be
obfuscation is a great way to do it. Yeah, right. Just changing the subject.
Right, because of the fact he never answers the damn question. He always, he's like and once again, he's an eloquent speaker. He doesn't doesn't any of that kind of stuff. He just talks, and he sounds like he knows what he's talking about, but the sad part of it is, I don't think he does. It's just like there's a classic. If you watch this, I don't know if you see this on YouTube, but Forbes has hundreds, maybe even thousands of these videos where Forbes takes like what's the system that they use in Congress where they televise all the congressional hearings. What's that channel called?
C-SPAN?
C-SPAN. Okay, C-SPAN. Yeah. Forbes takes these C-SPAN videos and they chop them up in little bites and put them up on YouTube. Some of them run 60 seconds, some of them run, 3, 4, 5 minutes. And what's amazing is you see some of these people on display, and these are legislators, and you go like, okay, we elected that guy? We elected that gal?
Yeah.
I mean, what were we thinking? Were we drunk when we went to the polls? And crazy stuff that comes out of their mouths. And once again, the Pete Buttigieg thing is like, he to me is the poster child for, let's put it this way. In the comms world that you were a part of with Monsanto and Bayer, if he were a comms guy, how would you rate him? 1 to 10.
The legal team would love him.
Right, exactly. Because
let's just say that, because he's not going to make any mistakes. He's not going to give a reporter too much. He's not going to be garrulous. He's not going to say too much. I would say the legal team would love him. Now, reporters and people like your stakeholder groups would hate him because he wouldn't be able to give an honest answer.
Right. But he won't ever give an answer. That's the crazy part of it is. Oh, the thing I was talking about was there's this video up of they were interviewing in a congressional hearing. They were interviewing the guy I don't think he got the job, but he was promoted. He was nominated to be the head of the Denver airport. He was like, what's the lady's name here in St. Louis? Has the three name.
Linda Steinbrugge, something like that.
Yeah, she's got the triple names. And essentially, he was going to be what she is. What she runs the St. Louis airport. He was going to run the Denver airport. And they get him in front of, it might have been John Kennedy. I can't remember which one of the legislators. And he goes through this whole line of questions. Okay, are you a pilot? No. Have you ever worked for the FAA? No. Have you ever run an airport before? No. Do you know anything about aviation? No. I mean, and they go through this whole line of questions, and you're going like, okay, don't you think that someone who's going to run an airport would have some kind of connection to aviation? Maybe once upon a time, they're even to the point where their dad was a pilot and he used to take you up.
They have it in their genes.
It is 152.
Real quick, the woman's name is Rhonda Ham-Nybrugge.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, and I'm going like, okay, but here's a perfect example. Okay, and I get that it's all political favors, that, because all these people who were running against Biden in the primary, how does he get them to go away? He promises them position. That's what he did with Pete Buttigieg, and he puts him in the Department of Transportation. Okay, the interesting part of it was the nickname that he had, and where was he? South Bend, Indiana? Where's that where he's from?
South Bend, yeah.
The interesting thing, if you've heard his nickname, they called him Pothole Pete. Have you ever heard this story?
Oh, yeah, I have heard this.
Because he couldn't keep the potholes filled. So the people in South Bend would complain because they have the same winters we have here in St. Louis. And what happens in late February, early March, and pretty much into April, and still right now, depending on when you're driving, there's a couple potholes I've hit on the interstate that's like, oh my God, if I wouldn't go 60 miles an hour, I would have fallen into that hole. Instead I sort of cruised over the top of it. That was the rub he had, that he couldn't even maintain the basic infrastructure. So he goes from being the mayor of what's South Bend, Indiana? What's the population of that? Do you know off the top of your head?
No idea. No. A small town.
I'm pretty sure it's under 100,000 people.
Yeah, it's a small town.
We're talking a city comparable in size to, let's say, Columbia, maybe? Would that be about right?
Yeah, it's probably smaller. Yeah, maybe Columbia. That's probably a good analogy.
Okay, let me look at South Bend there. I'll just South Bend. I got it. So anyway, he goes from being the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, population of 2020 census 103,453. So right 100,000. So that would be comparable. Isn't Columbia close to that? Isn't Columbia about
Yeah, maybe a little smaller than that.
Let me look here. Let me look at Columbia, BIA, Missouri, Columbia, MISSOURK. Take a guess what 2022 census residents in Columbia was.
93,000.
128,000. So,
oh wow, so that's way more than I thought.
South Bend is even smaller than Columbia, Missouri. So, I don't know. It's just when I heard this, a friend of mine sent me that clip, and he goes, "You're gonna love this." And I'm thinking, matter of fact, if you remember, there was a classic, and you're into this kind of stuff. And it might have even been, what's the dude who's Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin? Remember
Lloyd
when...
Benson? Or no, Lloyd Austin, you're right, yeah.
Remember when they had a congressional hearing and they were talking about they were spending millions and millions and millions of dollars to train these troops in Iran or some country like that, and we sent our special forces over there to train these troops, and we spent tens of millions of dollars to train these troops, and there was a congressional hearing, and they asked how many troops were actually combat ready. Remember this story?
I don't remember this, no.
And he said 6.
Oh.
And whoever the congressional person was, we're talking 6 platoons, 6 battalions, 6 companies? No, 6. And we spent tens of millions of dollars, and we trained 6 soldiers in this country. I can't remember. I'll dig this story up. And it's like, okay, let's think about that. Now, what's interesting is, let's take that into corporate life. In your days at Monsanto, if the Monsanto boys upstairs decided we need to train a bunch of people who could go out and diagnose problems with farmers' spraying equipment, and because let's say there was an issue with the sprayers weren't properly being adjusted right, and Monsanto said, well, here's what we need to do. We need to train a group of people to go out.
Yes,
and
I worked with teams like that, Brad. I did.
Right.
Every
Okay.
day.
You know what exactly I'm talking about. Okay. And let's say you reported back that let's say they put a $10 million budget on this program, and then it's your job. You're head of that program, and you go back to the CEO of Monsanto, and he says, now, John, how's that spraying program working? Well, we've trained 8 people. And you go, 8 people? We gave you $20 million. You've trained 8 people? Well, it's tough finding these guys that want to spend time on the road. And, when they go out to farmers, they got to go out to small towns. And, there's no Starbucks in small towns. And a lot of people won't go anywhere where there's no Starbucks.
First of all, we'd be told to clean out our desks.
Right. We'd be.
But the other thing is a corporation would have, and I don't know how government operates very well at all. But like, in the corporate world, you would have different gates and different stopgap measures whereby at the 1 month point, if you hadn't hit a certain mark of, okay, we have 300 field agents at the top of the funnel that we're training for this, and here's how many we expect to have next month, it'll be down to 280. And if you weren't hitting your gates, if you weren't hitting your numbers of success early on, somebody would come in and be like, WTF is going on here? Because that person has to go to their boss next month and defend how much money we're spending,
And you've made my case perfectly for me because of the fact that if someone would show up at Pete Buttigieg's door and say, hey, Pete, we gave DOT $7.5 billion 3 years ago. How many charging stations do we have up right now? Sir, we have 8. 8.
Yeah. It should never get to that point. And leadership should know very early on if there's any kind of a problem, because that's the only way you could fix it, or else you end up on national television defending having 8 charging stations after spending billions of dollars.
When I saw that video, I just thought to myself, this is what's wrong with this country. I mean,
but his campaign had that High Hope song. Remember, that was their gimmick. Remember, he had High Hopes as his theme song. Do you remember that?
Yeah, we got high hopes.
What a horrible song.
I know, it's like was that from the 30s or something like that?
I don't know, but it showed at his campaign rallies they had an organized dance for that. Do you remember?
What was the dance, John?
No, that's not a punchline. They had there was a literal Pete Buttigieg sponsored dance where they would do it like a flash mob at his campaign rallies. It was very sad. It was just a lot of effeminate and women in comfortable shoes doing a Pete Buttigieg dance.
There's a term John hasn't used for a while.
I haven't.
Women in comfortable
My kids
shoes.
are still singing the song though, Brad. So there's a lasting legacy there.
I have to play that again. We'll do that tomorrow. Okay, I didn't get to my population thing. That was in the second segment, which our internet dropped and we crashed and burned. So we'll pick that up tomorrow.
That's
John,
okay. We'll be at full strength tomorrow. More than likely. Good Lord willing.
It's hard to believe tomorrow's Thursday, isn't it?
It is. See everybody then.
Okay, John, say goodbye, John.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?